In this video, I'm going to walk you through a depth of field demonstration, kind of thing I might normally do in class, but I'm going to do this frame by frame. Hopefully it'll make a good sense to you. This will help you through the technical part of your assignment. This is just to experiment a little bit with a fixed scene with the different factors that affect your depth of field. Primarily here we're going to play with aperture and focal length and a little bit with distance, but primarily with the first two. And this is a little bit more elaborate than what I'm going to require that you do, but I think it'll give you a good starting point. And I'll walk you through each step of the process. You'll also have, this is a technical part of your exercise, kind of boring, but really helpful to get you a good sense, an apples to apples demo. You'll also be able to do a creative part of your assignment. And I'll post some photos a little bit later of my interpretation of the creative part. You can actually choose to do anything that you want within your home, but I'm going to give you some suggestions. Okay, so I have my camera set up in my studio. This is the setup. I picked these 5 little doggy figurines that I happen to have, put them in a kind of a row. They're staggered, and you'll see why, so you can see all of them. I used the ironing board because it was a nice height and nice and long. And I have my camera set up at a little bit of a distance. And you'll see in the next one, sorry about that, you'll see in the next frame that I have my camera, I won't show you the settings yet because they change each one, but the important thing is right now I have my camera set at the 55 millimeter end of this lens. This is an 18 to 55, what we call a kit lens. Many of you probably have this exact lens or a version of it. And I'm going to use this for the demo so that many of you who have this lens, you can use this exactly the same way. If you don't have this lens, if you have a fixed lens, that's fine. You can just use one focal length. If you have a similar zoom lens, you can play with that as well. I think it'll make sense. But this right now is the longer end of the lens. This is the telephoto lens end. Anything over 50 is a longer lens. And you'll see that effect. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started taking a look at the photographs that I took. I'm going to pull up the info so you can see this. I started at f8, and actually one of the reasons I started at f8 on this one was to give myself some latitude to move up. You can start at any aperture, but in this case, this aperture is relatively wide for the length of the lens. So what do you notice about this photograph? This is a long lens. Things are a little bit sort of squished together, but the main thing you should notice is that I focused here on this dog in the front, and all the way in the foreground, things are even right here. There's a little bit of out of focus here, and as you progressively go back to the other dogs, they get even more out of focus, all the way back to this guy who's really blurring out. Now watch what happens. I'm going to be changing 2 things actually with each of these scenes. I'm at ISO 400, 55 millimeters. I'm going to leave all that the same, but I'm going to go to f11, which means that I needed to go to, of course, an 1/8 of a second. It's one reason I have it on the tripod. If you don't have a tripod, by the way, you can just set this on any kind of sturdy surface and work that way. Tripod's ideal for this. So now I have it f8 at f11, or sorry, 1/8 of a second at f11. And you can see right away, if I go back to this one, you can see how the depth of field is already increasing. We still have the one dog in focus and the others are out of focus, but they're not as out of focus. They're starting to sharpen up. The next one is f16. Really notice from here to here, you see this dog's eyes start to pop up. His face gets clearer. I'm going to go to f22, sharper yet. Notice if you look back to the background, the window is starting to show some detail. And f32. Now, we still have some slight softness in the background, but look at how much more dramatically in focus things are. And this second dog, as well as the foreground, are all now in fairly sharp focus. Now, keep in mind with this, I'm working at the long end of my lens, and the long end of your lens will decrease depth of field to start with. So we were already starting with fairly dramatically shallow depth of field, and just tweaking it up by just changing the aperture and changing the shutter speed to compensate. Shutter speed has nothing to do with depth of field, but we need to adjust it to get the correct exposure. Let me just go back the other direction. And here. So even at f8, which is kind of a medium aperture, because we have this long lens and we're relatively close to the subject, we have this very shallow depth of field. When we go to the other end, we have relatively deep depth of field. Two very different kinds of photographs. Now I want to show you this again, but with the wide angle. So in order to do this, I had to move the camera up. I actually pushed it over the lip of the ironing board a little bit. And the reason I have to get closer is so that that near dog is in the same place in the composition. And you'll see, this is kind of like those two photos of the kids that I showed. So I'm at a 75th of a second at f1.8. And I'm able to be at f1.8. Oh, I'm at ISO 100. I don't know. I didn't realize I changed that, but we won't worry about that. Oh, sorry. Okay, ignore all of that. This is just like being in class. This is my iPhone. So I was like, how could I possibly be at 1.8? This is my iPhone. So it did all that automatically, but it's cool that it gives me the info. But you can see that this is my setup. I had to bring the camera closer. And I also, I'll just take that off so you don't worry about that. I also changed it to the 18 millimeter, which is the wide angle. And I want you to notice right away in this first scene how different that wide angle is. Let's just for a second go back and go to the first of this scene. And I'm going to pull these up together. So this is the comparison of the telephoto and the wide angle. So you can see that there's not so much difference in the depth of field, although there is a little bit. But the big thing is, even though I'm closer, I'm getting a lot more of the background, the edge of the table, and this is a lot narrower view. So right away, you see that this is quite a different photograph. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to here and go to D and put my info on. So this is at, oops, let's go to the next info. This is 1/30th of a second at f5.6 ISO 400. Next I went to f8. Oh, I want to make sure I'm doing that right. Oops, I'm on the wrong one. Hang on, you guys. No, I'm not going to retape it. It'll be just like being in the classroom. There we go. So let's go ahead and go to D and bring that up. So I'm at 1/30th of a second at f5.6. So relatively wide aperture and relatively close. So we've got a shallow depth of field, not quite as shallow as when we started off before, even at f8, but fairly shallow. Just that front puppy dog is in focus. Now I'm going to go to f8, and you can immediately see the depth of field increase. And I'm going to go to f11 and f16 and f22. And when we get to f22, the scene is, it's not, there's still a little softness in the background, but pretty much everything in that scene is in focus. Now, I'm not going to be able to go to f32 because this is a very oddball thing about lenses, which I will try to explain a little bit more, maybe if you come to a Zoom meeting. A little hard to explain in detail online, but zoom lenses, because of the way they're constructed, usually have a limitation of aperture on one side or the other. So even though I have f32 when I'm at the 55 millimeter, I don't have f32 when I'm at this end of my lens. And you'll find the converse to be true too. Again, come to a Zoom meeting and I'll probably go over that with the lens and we can play with our cameras together. Okay, so let's go on. Let's just show you some good student examples of this assignment. So you don't need to make 5 photos of each scene, and you don't need to make them with different focal lengths. I'll give you bonus points if you do. All I want you to do is make 2 photographs of the same scene with the same focal length and just changing your aperture and your shutter speed to give yourself some deeper depth of field. So here's a good student example. So in this case, he's at f4 at a 500th of a second. And here he's at f25 at a 15th of a second. And you can see that he increased that depth of field quite a bit. He's, oh, by the way, we'll go back. He's at a 22 millimeters, so he's doing this wide angle. In this one is even wider angle. This is the same student. He's at f3.5 at 3/20th of a second. And here he's at f22 at an eighth of a second. Very deep depth of field, really nicely done. This was a great one. This student was at, she has a different lens. I believe she has a fixed 50 millimeter lens. And so she shot this at f1.4. You may or may not have that kind of an aperture on your lens, but don't worry about it. If you just use the widest one you have. But she happened to have f1.4, so she had to shoot it at a 2500th of a second, very fast. And then she changed gears and she went to f16 at a 25th of a second. Really, really nice work. You notice over here it actually says 50 millimeters, and it says that her widest aperture, that's a designation of the lens, is f1.4. I'll show you that on another example so we can take a look. So on this one, this is great. This is at f32, nice small aperture at an eighth of a second, and everything from the foreground to the background is in sharp focus. This is the seat of a chair, by the way. And when we go to this one, she's at f6.3, which doesn't seem that wide, but it is, I mean, it doesn't seem that wide, but it because of the closeness and because of the kind of lens, it actually is. So this is f6.3 at 200th of a second, and just this part back here is in focus. Now, take a look at this. She's at 55 millimeters. She's on the kit lens, the 18 to 55, and it says over here f3 to 5.6. Notice that if we go back to this one, it's a much simpler designation here, and that's because this is not a zoom lens. What this is telling you is that at the 18 millimeter end of the lens, you can go to 3.5. At the long end, you can go to 5. You can only go down to 5.6, and that's a function of the lens. Take a look at a few more. This is also a kit lens. This is f20 at a 13th of a second. And this is f5.6 at a 125th. And it put that statue in the background out of focus. This was taken in class. And this is also a fixed lens. So this is at f1.8. And this is at f11. Didn't quite give you full depth of field, but definitely increased it. There's another one. This is also a kit lens. This is f22. And this is f5.6. And she's focused on that blade of the leaf right in the front. Oh, I really like this one. This is a great example of how to use things creatively. So this one is f5.6 at a 500th of a second. It's also a kit lens, so that's relatively wide. Focused on the dandelion, and the background is out of focus. This is at f36 at a 13th of a second. And notice that this is not as pleasing a photo because we really don't want all that background in focus. We don't want everything else there. It's really nicer to just have the dandelion. Oh, this is a nice example, and this is a little bit more like what I did. You're free to show off this way. This was taken indoors, so I'll just read through the apertures. This is also with a kit lens, nicely done. f22, f11. Notice the books or the tapes are going out of focus. f5.6. I think that's the last of that one. Nope, one more, f4.5. So gradually getting less and less, shallower and shallower depth of field. This one, the student changed positions a little bit too much, but it's still very nice. f22 and f5.6. f6.3 and f8. Not as dramatic a difference, but you can see a little bit of that difference. And this last one, this was a student who actually was quite experienced in the class, and I loved his example. Uh, he's just know that he actually has an advantage over many of the other students in the class, that he had more of a background. But this is at F22, beautiful photograph, and this is at F28. And this is at a 17 to 50 millimeter lens. So we focus very close in the front. Okay, I hope that helps you do your technical exercise. And as I said, please come to the Zoom meetings if you want to get a little bit more feedback, or contact me if you can't get to those, and we can meet individually. Take a break and then go try it.